What is up, everyone? Welcome to Resist the Algorithm. I am Ryan, and I'm so glad that you're here. If you're watching now or if you're watching later, I really appreciate you taking the time to hearing me out and listening to my thoughts and my ideas for now. My hope with this podcast is to eventually have on people to talk about different topics. It doesn't have to be ideological. It could be anything at all. I believe that having conversations about anything is important for a cohesive society, and that's why I'm here. I was really discouraged by the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and I decided that it was time for me to not just allow conversations to happen when they do, but actually to be proactive about it and have a conversation with you. So, one of the cornerstones of my life is being a truth seeker. I want to know the truth, whether that be ideologically, religiously, politically, whatever it happens to be, or it could be on topics of hobbies and interests and that sort of thing as well. So that's what this podcast is all about. And I hope you find it to be enriching and hopefully refreshing, something a little bit out of the normal thing that you might see that's very prevalent across social media. So I really thank you for being here. In line with the idea of being a truth seeker, I want to persuade you to be a truth seeker as well. So I kind of thought about my life and things that I do in my own life to kind of protect that idea of having truth at the forefront of the way I interact with the world. And I kind of came up with 5 traits that I hold personally, and I've been sharing them with you guys. I want to continue sharing them with you so that we might all be benefited by them. So the first is to have courage. We need to be courageous, not only in our beliefs, but in all things. When we see someone being wronged, when we have somebody saying something that's untrue in our presence, when we have someone wronging us, we need to have the courage to stand up and say something about it, to do something about it. And I believe that we can use our words so that we can not have to go to physical conflict. But ultimately, we need to have enough courage in our convictions and our beliefs that they are so strong that if we have to go there, that we are willing to do it. Again, that's not the goal. That's not the hope. That's not the type of society I want in America. We live in the freest, most peaceful time of all of human history, and I would love to see that continue on for hundreds of years. But I think in order to do that, we need to have courageous men and courageous women being willing to stand up for what they believe. The second is to defend your beliefs. So it kind of goes along with being courageous. If you're not courageous, it's very difficult to defend your beliefs. If you're timid, if you stay quiet, if you stay in the shadows, in the background of conversations, because you're afraid of certain things, it's very difficult to defend your beliefs. And we're talking about courage today in more depth. So I'll go into some more things on that as well. The next would be to be challenged. If we're going to seek out truth, we can't be so rigid in our belief system that we think we've got it all figured out. Now, we may have it figured out in most part about a portion of what we believe, but we can never be 100% of the way there. And I believe that's part of my Christian faith. We're called to be skeptics as Christians. We're called to test everything against the scripture and the book that we believe was sent to us by God. So it's backed up by that, to allow ourselves to be challenged and to challenge things, especially when they're claiming to be of a very high authority like God or a creator or that type of thing. So if we don't allow ourselves to be challenged, though, we will never know how strong our beliefs are. And it's very important for us to continue solidifying our beliefs and bringing them more in line with what the truth of the matter is. It's one reason why I don't typically like talking about new news stories with people right off the bat, because you oftentimes don't have enough evidence to make a good determination of what's actually going on. The fourth, and it's probably going to be the most contentious or the most disagreed upon among my viewers, but it's to pray for your enemies. So the goal ultimately is to not have enemies. But obviously, we live in a world where disagreements boil up to a point where people decide that they can't have commonality between one another, and people choose to be enemies with one another. So though I try to live without having any enemies myself, that doesn't mean that there aren't people out there that see me as an enemy. So I am commanded through my belief system and my faith to pray for my enemies. If you can't bring yourself to pray because you're saying to yourself, Ryan, I don't really believe in a God, that type of thing, that's fine. I get that. But I think we can all agree that society would be much better off if we were gracious towards those who hate us. We're not going to convince people with the sword that their ideology is incorrect and they don't have the truth. We're going to convince people by having conversations with one another, talking to one another. Even when we can't find common ground, I think we can find common grace where we're able to be gracious towards one another while we have a conversation and exercise that civility in discourse. And the fifth, this is what we talked about yesterday, the fifth and final trait is resist the algorithm. There is a technological component to our lives. We cannot avoid it. Even if you're off social media, there's still a technological component to your life. I understand the intricacies of how a lot of this technology works, and it's always there. It's prevalent. We're being bombarded by other actors trying to advertise to us and convince us and propagandize to us on a daily basis. And we need to be aware of that. We need to be mindful of those things so that we can resist that and actually find the truth in the midst of all of that. There's a lot of static out in the world. And if we aren't protecting ourselves from that static, we'll just get caught up in it, and we will be convinced of things that are untrue because there are other actors in the world trying to convince us of these things. So those are the 5 traits, right? To have courage, to defend your beliefs, to be challenged, to pray for your enemies, and to resist the algorithm. And I think if we all brought those things into our lives, society would be better as a whole. So those were the 5 traits that I've identified. I think they're really important to focus on and think about. Awesome. So today, yesterday I made the announcement that, and I'll make it again here now, that I'm probably not going to go over news every day. That's not the point of this podcast. Anybody and their mom can look at the headlines and give an opinion on what they think about it. So I'm not going to convince anybody by looking at headlines. Now, if there's something cultural that is happening in the news, I will talk about that. But the reason why I want to move away from current events and more onto cultural ideas and ideology is because culture is downstream from politics, downstream from legislation, downstream from societal acceptance of things. So I think we need to start at the root and have conversations about, philosophical conversations, ideological conversations about topics that are cultural, in order to have society benefit from that. We all need to be thinking about the deeper root things before it educates what we do politically, before we can even look at the news from a lens of objectivity and that sort of thing. So from now on, I'm hoping the podcasts are a little bit shorter, a little more digestible, but I want to go over one cultural topic each day, and then I'm going to still go over the Federalist Papers because I believe that's a glimpse into the past, into history, into the culture of the moment. For us to understand historical cultural significance will also help us to not make similar mistakes going forward in the future. Hey, Emilio, how you doing, man? I hope you're good. So today I want to talk about courage and being courageous. Courage is a difficult thing to implement and to exercise in your life, especially if you are a timid, weak, feckless type of person. If that's the stage, if that's a stage in life that you're in, if you've never opened your mouth and said what you believe, then it's even more difficult. But I would encourage you to find opportunities to do that. So here is my case for being courageous. First, having courage builds strength of your character, right? When you act with courage, you grow more confident and more resilient. A lot of people mistake the courage with being fearless, and those are two different things. In fact, I don't think you can be courageous if you don't have fear in a situation, right? So courage is acting out in spite of the fear that you have, and it helps you to become a stronger and steadier person. So when you see that you have done something wrong, even in the smallest of things, having courage to go and correct that mistake will help you to have the courage when you make the bigger mistakes. It will help you to even avoid the bigger mistakes. Courage also inspires other people. So when someone stands firm in their beliefs, even if people don't disagree with it, there's something admirable about that. There's something where we're inspired. We look at that person and we say, man, that's something that I want to be like. Even if I don't agree with what the person's saying, I would like to be like that. When people share their beliefs honestly, it gives you and me and everyone else the ability to say, oh, okay, this is someone else has done it, so I can do it. It gives us the ability to kind of get in the fight and the permission to kind of get into the conversation about things. Without courage, we can't have truth. So fear keeps people silent. And again, courage is not being fearless. Courage is doing the right thing in spite of the fear that we have. So when we have courage, we're able to speak the truth of what we believe in turn, right? In whatever situation we're in, even when those opinions are unpopular. It's often meant, this often meant telling people things that they don't want to hear. Like it means that we tell people things that are hard for them to hear, but they need to hear. And it's true today as it was in the past. Courage clears the way for honesty, growth, and truth. Many of us, I think, maybe you can agree with this, can think of a time when either someone came and told us a hard truth, or we felt compelled to tell someone else a hard truth, and that changed either the course of where our life was headed for that moment, and it might not be that grand, right, that big of a thing, but it changed the reality on the ground, because someone came and kind of gave us a verbal slap in the face and said, hey, you need to knock this off. Or we felt compelled to go say to someone, hey, I'm really concerned. And when we're able to have courage and say those things, we're also exercising love, right? Love is not just sitting back and allowing people to do whatever the heck they want. If you see someone in a car driving very quickly towards a cliff, it's our duty to go and say something to them, to help them and say, hey, wait, there's danger ahead. There's danger up in front. So the other benefit of courage is it protects us from regret. I think, again, similar situation. We can all think of a time where we did not say something, where we did not do something. No one gets to the end of their life really and thinks, oh, I wish I hadn't said that thing that was true, right? People think, oh, I wish I had said that thing that was true. What if I hadn't spoken up, right? What would that have changed? Would that have changed the outcome? Where would my life have gone if I only had more courage in that moment? How would it look different? So if you have either story, right, where you've said something hard to someone, you had courage and said something hard, or someone said something difficult to you and it changed the course that you were on, or if there was a time where you spoke up and you knew you didn't regret speaking up, pop it in the comments below. I'd love to hear the story. The other main benefit of courage is it brings about peace. When we have courage to talk about our beliefs, to say things that are true, it brings about peace, because everyone can look at truth and objectively understand that it's true. Now, maybe not everyone will agree, and they might have their own biases and their own pride that gets in the way of that, but everyone recognizes truth. And I think as well, everything, things that are true are going to always be true, but we're going to get glimpses of that truth from different angles and vantage points. And a lot of times we don't have the totality of the truth. So I think it's okay to, and even good to progress when we see more pieces of what that truth is. And peace comes from it. Internal peace comes from having the courage to say the truth, because you're not unsure in situations about what you'd say in those situations, and because of trying to find common ground through spreading truth. we also will have peace among each other, even when we might disagree about how to implement what that truth means. Um, the challenges of being courageous. So, there are many challenges with being courageous, especially if you feel like you're the only one that is doing it. But it's uncomfortable to stand up and stand out, right? That's the first thing that comes to mind. It's really uncomfortable to be courageous, to just say what's on your mind, to speak the truth, right? Most people just go with the flow. Choosing to be courageous, it may look odd, it may look rebellious, it may look like it's mean or foolhardy even, and you risk being the one rocking the boat. If no one else in your sphere is being courageous, it looks odd and it's uncomfortable. And this can bring about a fear of rejection or isolation. So that'd be like the second thing, right? That is a challenge. Being courageous oftentimes leads to rejection and isolation initially. Speaking up, living boldly can cause others to distance themselves from you, right? Especially if your actions or belief are challenging what the status quo is of the majority of people, or what the majority of people have accepted. So it is lonely at times to be courageous. But in having courage, what I've found is you find other people who have that similar level of courage and are willing, above all else, to speak up and exercise that courage that they have. A lot of times when you're courageous, there's pressure then to conform. So if you have the truth and society is going against the truth, there's going to be outsized pressure to conform to what society wants, right? Because most people in society, like I just said, go with the flow. They just follow the path that's been laid out to them. But critical thinkers are looking and being critical about that and saying, is that the right thing? Is that the truth, right? So societies often lack courage, and they prize similarity and safety over standing out and rocking the boat and seeking truth. So there's oftentimes pressure then to conform. It might be subtle. In recent years, we've seen very harsh pressure to conform, but it's even more important in times like that where the societal pressure becomes militant, that we stand firm in what we know to be true and continue to have the courage to speak about our beliefs. You risk criticism, you risk attack, certainly. So we've seen that very, very much so recently. So you have to get a little bit of thick skin to have courage too, right? Because people are going to come and say mean things to you, especially online. And if you think words will hurt you, and sticks and stones are worse, or something like that, then you need to kind of have a paradigm shift in that conception that you have of words. A long time ago, I decided to stop caring about what others thought about me. Now, that's not to say I don't consider what people have to say about things in my life, but I don't care about my critics, right? I don't care about the people who say, oh, he's dumb or silly or foolish for doing that, right? And I'm being very tame in things that have been said to me before and said about me before. But I stopped caring, because those aren't the people that are, on the same path as I'm on. Those people are following a different life path than I am. So it's not an easy thing to do. I don't mean to diminish it or make light of it, but you have to be willing to be criticized, potentially attacked, for having courage and standing up for your beliefs. And courage isn't a guarantee of the outcome either. So the other challenge, another challenge rather, is that you're not certain of what will happen, right? You're not guaranteed to succeed just because you're emphatically courageous about things, right? Especially if if you don't have good arguments, right? If your beliefs aren't very strong, you can have all the courage in the world, but they're not going to change people's hearts and change people's minds on the subject of the truth that you hold. You may lose out on opportunities. You may lose out on relationships. You definitely will lose out on approval. And you have to be willing to sacrifice those things for the good of the truth, for the good of society, because the more people that stand together courageously about truth, the harder it's going to be for these challenges to overcome what the truth of things are. And it is tiring. I will say this. So I'll share this at this point. I used to be an extremely manipulative person. When I was in middle school and high school, I had no idea who I was. I didn't know what type of person I wanted to be, and I just wanted people to consider me as a friend. So I would tell people at school one thing, and then I would go home and I would craft a different story to my parents and my family. And then I would go to church and youth group and have a different personality, different story, different thing that I would say there. And I lied to everyone. There was very rarely the truth being told in my life. And I kind of had a moment where someone crossed over in those three spheres, and they finally said to me, "Hey, Ryan, like, this is not good. You are untrustworthy. You're a liar. You're not someone that can be taken seriously. You don't have very strong convictions," right? They kind of lovingly slapped me in the face and said, you need to change, or you're headed towards destruction, right? And I kind of had a moment, and I decided, okay, above all else, I'm going to tell the truth. Even if I lie, I'm going to go correct that lie as immediately as I can. And now, 30 years later, there's still times where I slip up, and for some reason I tell a lie, and then I tell it again, and I have to go and correct it. So it's a lot easier to not be courageous, to not tell the truth, is the point of me sharing that with you. Like, when I was a kid and I was a manipulative person, it was easier to do that, but it was also difficult to try and keep all those stories straight. So it's a lot simpler to just tell the truth and have the courage to tell the truth than it is to kind of keep track of all the lies. But that being said, there is an emotional toll. It's very draining. When you have a trigger inside of you that just goes off when you hear something that's untrue, and it's like, I have to say something about that. I think that's a good thing, but it's also like you need to keep in mind that you need to keep some energy in the store, right, in the tank, for the ability to do that. All right. The most important thing I think that courage changes in society, this is the most important point I'll make about this, is courage prevents costly battles later on. So I talked earlier about how courage brings peace, not only internally, but externally as well. But if we choose to not have courage now in this moment where we can speak about beliefs, that means that we will have to have courage later on the battlefield. That means that eventually it'll get to the point where physically fighting one another is going to be the only option. And that is a lot more costly version of courage than it is to speak up about your beliefs now. So silence breeds oppression, right? If society chooses to be quiet and chooses not to have courage and doesn't stand up against tyrannical forces and evil forces and enemy ideologies, then we will lose freedom to a point in which time where there will need to be a conflict. And I hope that's not what we do. I hope that's not where we go. That's why I'm here, speaking up and speaking out. So examples of this in modern history. So many Germans during the lead up in the 30s and 40s to World War II remained quiet as, Hitler consolidated his power. He stripped rights from Jews and people who disagreed with him. And by the time a resistant movement formed, it cost millions of lives in World War II, right? The most bloody campaign of all human history. And that's what being silent. We have to know the risk and the cost. You can choose to be silent. I'm not saying you have to be courageous. I'm saying that it's better to be courageous now than it is later on. The civil rights movement, after decades of silence and racial injustice throughout America, Americans had to band together to bring about the civil rights movement. And there were violent things that had to happen there, and they had to be courageous, physically courageous at times. And then, in the 90s, Rwanda, right? Years of ignored tensions between the Hutus and the Tutsis erupted into the genocide that we all know about in Rwanda. So again, ordinary people who just wanted to live their lives because of their silence, they were either forced into hiding, or they had to be courageous in physical acts. I don't want to go to war. I think most Americans do not want to go to war. We don't want another physical civil war here in America. But right now we are in a civil Cold War. And I think a huge part of that is because we stopped talking to one another, and we're just talking past one another. So if we avoid the courage to speak and act while it's only words, we may one day be forced to use courage in a life or death situation. And I would hate to see us get there. So that's my case on having courage. I hope that it is somewhat convincing. If I'm missing something, or if I overstepped anywhere, please leave a comment below. I'd love to have a conversation with you about it and form my belief system to be more in line with the truth. So this podcast is sponsored by Niched. What is Niched, you might ask? Well, Niched is a new type of platform. It's something that I have created, and it essentially took everything that social media has that people do dislike about it, things like algorithms, attacking free speech, the moderators and admins that decide whether or not we have access to topics of interest because they created the group and for some reason they get to be in charge of the conversation that flows out of it. The non-ability to have functionality over controlling your feed and deciding what you see and what you don't see. I took all of those things and I just eliminated it, and I created a platform based on the absence of those things. So there's no algorithm, there's no gatekeepers and moderators. You have the ability to control your feed through functionality and filters and that sort of thing. So it's totally in your control. It's a platform for the people. So because I removed the things that make social media what it is, I'm not even calling this a social media platform. It is a human interaction platform. The one main behavior change, so that we have the functionality to filter and sort, is that when you make a post, you put a niche associated with it. So if I were to post about kayaking and fishing, I could put those two niches on it. And if one of my friends just hates fishing and has blocked fishing, they would not see that post, even though they might like kayaking. So it's a simple way to be able to have your feed be a concierge curated environment that's 100% unique to you. There's more to it than that, but if you're interested in anything I was talking about there, please go to resistthealgorithm.com and you can learn more about it. Right now, we're in a beta phase. It's a paid beta, but here in the very near future, there is going to be an update that will release a waiting list for free accounts, and I will also be limited in a limited fashion releasing free accounts as well until I know that all the bits and pieces are working correctly, at which point there will always be a free level for you to interact with the app. All right, very good. Let's hop into the Federalist paper then. So we are on Federalist number 7 today. There's a couple of key sections here, but this is Federalist number 7. Why are we going over this? Again, it's to take a look into the culture of the Founding Fathers, to see what their perspective on things were. There was a big conversation right now at this time when these were published about whether the Union, this is post-Revolutionary War, but whether the Union should split into the individual states, into confederacies, and Hamilton, along with John Jay and Madison, I believe, were writing different letters, essentially, publishing different letters to make a case for what their belief was on it. So I think it's beneficial for us to look at past culture, past perspectives, to be able to not make the same mistakes in the future, and to understand what the Founding Fathers wanted and hoped for the country, and to see if we're in line with that, if they were incorrect about their beliefs, or if we've strayed away from that. So let's take a look here. Territorial disputes have... So this is the same subject continued. Federalist number 7, same subject continued, concerning dangers from dissensions between the states. Alexander Hamilton wrote this. We know that now. I don't know if I've said this, but they didn't know that at the time. All three of these guys wrote under the same pen name. All right. Territorial disputes have at all times been found one of the most fertile sources of hostility among nations. Perhaps the greatest proportion of wars that have desolated the earth have sprung from this origin. This cause would exist among us in full force. There still are discordant and undecided claims between several of them, and the dissolution of the Union would lay a foundation for similar claims between them all. It is well known that they have heretofore had serious and animated discussions concerning the rights to the lands which were ungranted at the time of the Revolution, and which usually went under the name of Crown lands. The states within the limits of those of whose colony governments they were comprised have claimed them as their property. The others have contended that the rights of the Crown in this article devolved upon the Union, especially as to all that part of the Western Territory which either by actual possession or through the submission of the Indian perpetrators was subjected to the jurisdiction of the King of Britain, till it was relinquished in the Treaty of Peace. Okay, so he's talking about here how states have claims over territories. If we don't stay as a union, those claims will be more prevalent, like more states, more individual states will take those claims, and also that there isn't going to be a great way to resolve that because we'll be separate governments, separate countries, essentially, right? Pop down here. This is important too. Those who had an opportunity of seeing the inside of the transactions which attended the progress of the controversy between this state and the District of Vermont, so he's saying between New York and the District of Vermont, can vouch the opposition we experienced, as well from states not interested as from those which were interested in the claim, and can attest the danger to which the peace of the Confederacy might have been exposed had this state attempted to assert its rights by force. Two motives propounded in the opposition: one, a jealousy entertained of our future power, and the other, the interests of certain individuals of influence in the neighboring states who had obtained grants of lands under the actual government of that district. So he's saying, there was a disagreement about Vermont, and even though we had the Union, there were multiple claims to it, and it could have broken out into something more than it was. So the Union kind of stopped the actual skirmish or fights from happening, but it could have been worse. The competitions of commerce would be another fruitful source of contention. The states less favorably circumstanced would be desirous of escaping from the disadvantages of local situation and of sharing in the advantages of their more fortunate neighbors. Each state or separate confederacy would pursue a system of commercial policy particular to itself. This would occasion distinctions, preferences, and exclusions, which would beget discontent. The habits of intercourse on the basis of equal privileges, to which we have been accustomed since the earliest settlement of the country, would give a keener edge to those causes of discontent than they would naturally have independent of this circumstance. We should be ready to dominate injuries those things which were in reality the justifiable acts of independent sovereignties consulting a distinct interest. So he's saying everyone would have different commercial laws and statutes in place, and states that have less favorable commerce would be envious of their neighbors, and this would create competition. This would create potentially violent competition down the road, where countries at this point, if they had gone this way, would have been invading other countries. North Carolina invading Virginia, that type of thing, based on commerce potentially. Okay. Next, he talks about taxation, the opportunities which some states would have of rendering others tributary to them by commercial regulations would be impatiently submitted by the tributary states. The relative situation of New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey would afford an example of this kind. New York, from the necessities of revenue, must lay duties on her importers. A great part of these duties must be paid by the inhabitants of the two other states in the capacity of consumers of what we import. New York would neither be willing nor able to forego this advantage. Her citizens would not consent to a duty paid by them should be remitted in favor of the citizens of her neighbors, nor would it be practicable if there were not this impediment in the way to distinguish the customers in our own markets. Would Connecticut and New Jersey long submit to being taxed by New York for her exclusive benefit? Should we be long permitted to remain in the quiet, undisturbed enjoyment of a metropolis, from the possession of which we derived an advantage so odious to our neighbors, and in their opinion so oppressive? Should we be able to preserve it against the incumbent weight of Connecticut on the one side and the cooperating pressure of New Jersey on the other? These are questions that temerity alone will answer in the affirmative. Okay, so what's he saying? He's saying we have a huge city on an island with ports, and things come into us. And of course, when we send them out to Connecticut and New Jersey, we would have to tax them. If we were a lone country, it would not be satisfactory to our citizens to not do so, because we control that way into Connecticut and New Jersey. And then he said, now, if that were the case, would Connecticut and New Jersey be willing to stay in that situation for so long, or would there not be conflict among one another? So he's making an argument for, freedom of commerce throughout a whole union. He then talks about debt. The public debt of the Union would be a further cause of collision between the separate states or confederacies. The apportionment in the first instance and the progressive extinguishment afterwards would be alike productive of ill humor and animosity. How would it be possible to agree upon a rule of apportionment satisfactory to all? There is scarcely any that can be proposed which is entirely free from real objections. These, as usual, would be exaggerated by the adverse interest of the parties. These would be inclined to magnify the difficulties of a distributions. Others of them, a numerous body of whose citizens are creditors to the public beyond proportion of the state in the total amount of the national debt, would be strenuous for some equitable and effective provision. So what's he saying there? We have debt. We owe people money, right? It costs us money to go into these wars and to start this country, and we have to pay that back somehow. If we split, if we fracture, how will we satisfy everyone in how we apportion that debt and how it is to be paid back? And also, will the countries be satisfied that we split it up into 13 different debt, silos, essentially? Or were they expecting to get paid back by one, source of satisfying that debt? All right. And then here he concludes. The probability of incompatible alliances between the different states or confederacies and different foreign nations, and the effects of this situation upon the peace of the whole, have been sufficiently unfolded in some preceding papers. From the views they have exhibited of this part of the subject, this conclusion is to be drawn, that America, if not connected at all, or only by the feeble tie of a simple league, offense and defense would, by the operation of such jarring alliances, be gradually entangled in all of the pernicious labyrinths of European politics and wars, and by the destructive contentions of the parts unto which she was divided, would be likely to become a prey to the artifices and the machinations of powers equally the enemies of them all. Divide et imperia must be the motto of every nation that either hates or fears us. So he's saying if we do not stay united, if we do not continue to stay a union, then we will be caught up in being essentially strongholds in European politics and European wars. And the enemies of us all will become the enemies of us all individually, and we will be the worse off for it. All right, that was Federalist number 7. That is everything I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening to what I have to say. Remember, have courage, defend your beliefs, be challenged, pray for your enemies, and above all else, resist the algorithm. And I will see you guys tomorrow.